It was a blast of excitement for me to see Dylan's mother pull her car into my driveway. I leapt from the viewing window upstairs and expertly executed every turn and change in elevation throughout my house with professional ease. Like an electrical current, my limbs moved with speed and refused to stop as I hurried my way to the door. My excitement came to a dead halt about midway into the kitchen when I caught sight of Kristen, which unfortunately my body did not. The socks I was wearing caused me to slide across the wooden surface, which quickly changed into tile flooring, and then into the furry surfaced welcome mat at my side entrance door. I was worried for a moment that Kristen would shoot down this opportunity for fun, but pushed that to the back of my mind as I opened the door to greet Dylan. Dylan's mother was in front and looked at me with a growing smile. "Hey, Derek," she said, enthusiastic to see her son's best friend. She was a good-looking mother who retained all the color in her hair despite having to deal with the stresses of a son such as Dylan. "I thought it'd be great and a great idea for Dylan to come by and bring you some of the schoolwork you may have missed," she said, with a giant grin. I bashfully looked down as I was unable to share any excitement for schoolwork. Dylan peeped out from behind his mother and ran to the front of her, which threw a smile back on my face. My sister was behind me looking over my shoulder, and I grew tense as her hand rested upon me. I half expected her to grab onto my shirt in order to prevent me from running off somewhere with Dylan, and then expect her to force me to listen to her painful explanation of how I am supposed to be punished, and fun is not a part of that. With the grace of luck, Dylan's mother took the initiative and broke out into a full-fledged conversation with Kristen before my sister had a chance to slip out a word. It was one of those awkward talks adults have with one another, as they try and act friendly and interested, but they don't relate in any way whatsoever. Kristen's arm lifted off of me as she was too accustomed to waving her hands around as she tried to find the right words to say when speaking to Dylan's mother. I quickly took opportunity of this. Dylan and I managed to squeeze between the two chatting gals to get back into the side door I had come from. We blew through the doorway into the kitchen with relief and filled its spacious interior with our freely moving bodies. It was never easy composing oneself in front of adults, as they always expected unreasonable things, like for us kids to stand firm and still during boring conversations. But now that we were out of sight, we were ourselves again, and let the energetic current flow through our limbs. "So, my mom made me bring these things over, since you're not at school at all?" Dylan said as he unfolded the piles of papers under his arm onto my countertop. He tried hard to assure me it wasn't his idea to do so. "Since when do I ever do schoolwork?" I asked aloud with a hint of pride. Rebellious tendencies were the popular thing to do, and I was a master at popularity. "That is what I told her, but she wouldn't listen." The conversation went quiet. As if to show any interest at all, I leapt over to the counter and sorted through the pile of papers, discarded them as quickly as I had lost interest in them. "I'm only in one of your classes, so I didn't really get much. I heard you have a lot of classes with Mrs. Peterson? I didn't want to mention you to her." "Whatever," I said, caring little for the topics of conversation and showing no appreciation for his effort to retrieve work from me. I continued to flip through the pages as though something interestingly bound would come up. "Health?" I exclaimed. "Ew, no." I threw the paper onto the ground in further display of displeasure. "Let's go to my room. I got something to show you." I really can't. I gotta get going." Dylan apprehensively looked back at his mother, who was still conversing with Kristen. "I am supposed to go to some boring family thing." My hopes for amusement vanished in an instant. "Well, that sucks," I replied, staring at Dylan with a look of betrayal. "Alright, Dylan, thanks for stopping by," said Kristen, breaking up the awkward tension, concluding Dylan's rather brief stay as she entered the kitchen from the side door. I then turned my gaze at her and added a hint of malice to my look for having hastened our already short enough time together. Dylan looked at me as a silent goodbye and rejoined with his mother, who waited outside patiently for her son's sluggish return. The two piled back into the car they had come from, taking my hopes for entertainment along with them, leaving me to endure the boredom of my day alone. As they were leaving, Dylan's mother gave one of these fleeting waves where her hand flapped wildly like a flag in a windstorm all the way until she drove out of view down the long slope of my driveway. Kristen came back inside after waving her own goodbye and looked at the stack of papers on the countertop table left for me. "Looks like fun. Now at least you have something to do," she said, shrugging as she shared the same lack of enthusiasm I had when it came to schoolwork. Right, I said, and sat down on the countertop stool as if I was actually going to commit some time to this work. Junk, 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 and more junk, I said to myself as I sifted through the papers, sliding them off of one another with a quick flick of the finger. Schoolwork was so boring. What was the point behind it all? It was the one thing that held me back. My test grades were flawless, but the homework grades were always low, if nothing at all. That and the new implementation of the participation grade they introduced in the middle school was just another way of robbing me of a passing grade. It was such an abstract and biased notion by the teachers, because the silent, pencil-hoarding teacher's pet, who wouldn't people word the entire day, got a so-called passing participation grade, and I, who was easily the most vocal of the class, lacked such a positive evaluation. Just tell me how that was fair. I got up off the stool as that was about as much time as I would willingly spend on schoolwork, until my right foot nearly slid out from under me as I stepped on the sheet of paper I had dropped earlier. Catching myself quickly, my face plastered into the tile floor. I swept up the sheet of paper on my way back up. I placed it with the others, which would soon end up in the trash can if I had it my way, until the title caught my eye. Without even cognitively realizing what I was doing, I pulled out the stool, sat down, and began reading. It was a health paper, informing me in a monotonous academic fashion. The physical changes I will be experiencing in the next few years. Changes? Something I was all too familiar with in these arriving days. I sought for an answer I knew would not be there, but I read on anyways, hoping I'd come to a viable conclusion that told me I wasn't so much different than everyone else, that everyone experiences this and not just me. Reaching the last word on the page, I flipped it over, searching for more. When I found nothing but a blank page with the faint outline of the words on the other side, a conscious and sickening thought had occurred to me. I had just read a paper from school. I had just applied myself to something that was indisputably homework. It was outrageous, and instantly I looked around for something to remedy my illness, my potential intoxication of having progressed into the domain of nerdiness. Dad came waltzing in the door, breaking my concerning thought. It was about time that he got his afternoon drink in to help him get through the remainder of his shift. In anticipation, I opened the refrigerator door and grabbed his favorite beverage from his section of the fridge, which was designated as the cabinets below. I wanted to do something for him, and I could think of nothing better. Kristen came back into the room and greeted him passively. I gave him the beer. "Thanks, son," he remarked, and began to go off to his studio. "Hey, tell Kristen she can't have her boyfriend over," I ordered my dad, still aggravated at Kristen from having over the past few days. "Kristen, you can't have your boyfriend over," my father said, turning for an instant before continuing his course while resting his finger on the prying top of the beer can. I loved him for that. I smiled as I watched him say it without much real authority behind his voice. He seemed to do it jokingly, as he always had, but now I began to wonder if his words ever had substance at all. Changes. Curiosity took its course. How much of my father willingly said that to Kristen? I wasn't sure if he was joking anymore. "What? No, you don't even know him," Kristen argued back to him. I ran to my father's side and grabbed onto his arm as I wanted to drive this argument even further. I always felt closer to a person when I could touch them. I felt as though my words had more meaning, when I could feel them in my hands. "No, he can't. He'll make a mess of the house," I told my father. "Oh, I'm sorry. No, he can't. He'll make a mess of the house," I told my father. I didn't particularly like what I was doing. I knew I could do it, but I didn't want to burden my father with it. This time, however, I had little choice. David had to be stopped. "Kristen, no. I don't want your boyfriend over," my father stated, with the first signs of emotion in his voice. It was unlikely of him to take any form of authority, but now that I was applying it in my own voice, he took it up as his own. This was a new thing to us all. "Dad, what the hell? Why are you listening to him?" Kristen shouted and looked at me with an evil eye. She knew I was the source of the problem. "He's an asshole," I thought, looked into the corner of my father's eyes. I knew he could hear it. "An asshole. I am an ass. Look at how I treat my family. Who am I to judge?" I could hear my father's thoughts. Though vague and distant, the message was clear. He lacked confidence. "This is your house, no one else's. You make the rules," I thought, staring intently at my father, as his face molded into an array of conflicting emotions. "Don't let him in here. He will ruin the place," I said. Before my father could speak, Kristen grabbed my arm and pried it off of him. She turned me towards her and slapped a right hand across my face. It wasn't the first time she hit me, but I had never felt her use her strength like that. I was thrown to the ground by the force as the left side of my face felt like 1,000 bees were stinging at its surface. My father looked on in a daze, as though uncertain as to what had unfolded. The quick separation of my will from his had thrown his mind into a muddle. I didn't want to see him like this. Go away, I thought forcefully, and my father quickly turned off to his studio. Pain pulsed throughout the left side of my face, but I could take any amount of pain.